Alright, so it's almost 5 o'clock in the morning. I haven't slept yet, and I forgot that I have to do this video still. So, and these are movies, all four of them are movies that I saw last week, so, this should be fun. And we're going all horror related, so let's go ahead and start with the newest movie on the schedule, which is Firestarter, the remake. And the thing about this is, you might go into this, or you might see a poster or something, and you might think, why in God's name would they do this again? Or you could be not only like me, but I actually heard some other people saying this as well. It was only recently that I even realized this was going to theaters. And then I learned a little later that it technically is going straight to streaming as well, just simultaneously. And I guess some people weren't sure if it was going to be a TV show or what it was. A lot of confusion about this movie's entire existence. But even though it is streaming simultaneously on Peacock, I figured, why not go ahead and just go to the theater? And the reason that I went with that was to kind of give it the benefit of the doubt. Like, it's because if you watch a movie just streaming, it's obviously gonna feel like a streaming movie. So it's like, I want to see if they maybe did something cinematic, you know? And that's gonna get, I mean, you can kind of get that vibe on streaming if you're generous enough. But let's just go do the whole thing. And the reason I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt was, you may or may not remember if you've been around here, that just last year, I believe, I did a video about the original movie with Drew Barrymore. I did it with, I talked about it alongside Carrie, De Palma's Carrie, and by extension their books as well. And I had brought some things up in that video that gave me the idea that there was room to be improved on with Firestarter being adapted as a movie. So, because the first movie is not perfect at all, and controversial as this opinion may be, I don't think the book is perfect either. Particularly, the thing I call out the most is it grinds to an absolute halt when we get to the shop, and it's no longer a story about them being pursued. Um, and and how they're going to use their powers to get out of situations and stuff like that. So, and it was like, and this movie is 20 minutes shorter than the original movie, so I was like, okay, so they clearly cut stuff out, and it's like, if they cut out all the dull shit, all the repetitive shit, from the first movie, and really the story itself, maybe we might have something here. And it's, because I wasn't quite sure, because surprisingly enough, the original movie is pretty close to the book, as far as I remember. But I went into this, and the thing about, you might think, you know, being a shorter movie, it's gonna feel shorter, but it kind of doesn't. We have a real pacing problem, and it feels a lot longer than it is. A lot of this might be the fact that this movie is actually in chronological order, which is new to Firestarter. But and they try to get past some stuff quickly in effective enough ways. Like, the whole testing portion is just the opening credit sequence. But yet, as soon as it starts, it feels very much like we're going much slower. And it's not necessarily just because as soon as both the book and the original movie start, it's immediate. They're just immediately being pursued. We're in mid-chase, pretty much, when they start. And here, we have, you know, the boring family shit. Because we get, you know, the test stuff out of the way during the opening credits, so now we're just stuck with, oh, we're parents, we're in over our heads, and we have a child that has this power, and we don't know what to do about it. And we have powers as well, and obviously, you know, the father, who is Zac Efron now, is starting to feel physical effects from that. It's all the stuff that we know. Only instead of, like, having nosebleeds now, he bleeds out of his eyes. So there's a change for you, I guess, from the original movie, anyway. Um, but there is one promising thing here in this opening, and it's probably one of the only good aspects of this. Like, you can take away and say, "Oh, they did that well." Um, Not quite sure how literally they scored this, but they got John Carpenter. So, and that's not the first time I'm going to say that in this video, it turns out. And irony aside, because we went through the whole thing about how he was supposed to do the original Firestarter, and didn't, but that's about all we really get here as far as something worthwhile, something that feels like kind of a classic, and takes us back to that. The thing that you would, the feeling you would hope to get out of this movie, as far as the stuff that they put in here, to somehow they added so much while the movie's 20 minutes shorter now. And a lot of that is, we see Charlie in school, which is something we haven't gotten a taste of yet either. So you would think there's interesting stuff here, like, because you would think with what, triggers the whole power that she has and for the fire to go off, you would think school would be a dangerous environment because with other kids around and bullies and stuff like that, because we are in a Stephen King story, there's definitely going to be bullies here. There would be things all around that would easily set this off. And how do you deal with that? So we get to see her doing stuff like, controlling it or subduing it or whatever. More than just the piece of toast from the original movie. We get a whole taste of it at school, and then what happens when things sort of go wrong and attention starts to get drawn to what's happening here. Is all this necessary, and is it interesting enough? I would say the idea is interesting enough, but this movie's execution of it kind of really isn't. Because it's like, as soon as it shows us like Charlie in school, it's like, oh, where's this gonna go? But then at the same time, we basically got that with Carrie. It's just fire now. So, no, there's nothing that really is gonna come out of getting to see Charlie at school. So, but it takes the movie a while to figure that out. So, as it goes on, we do have one moment here that kind of not really corrects something, but something that I'd always questioned about this story, and that was the idea of this story constantly being classified as horror is something that I never really understood. I always saw it as kind of a sci-fi thing, but both the book and the original movie are widely considered horror. I don't know if that's just because of King's name, that they just do that automatically or what, but the idea now is, are they going to try to make this more like a horror movie, especially with it being a Blumhouse movie? And so we do get this scene where she's in the school bathroom and she's like hiding in a stall, and there is this kind of cool thing where you can see those, when it's like blisteringly hot outside and you look like out your car window or something, you can see that ripple that heat has. I have no idea what that's called, but I'm sure there's a scientific name. I failed science, don't ask me. But we can see that in the bathroom as it's like almost like a warning or something. And then there's like, it does kind of treat Charlie like a monster, in this instance. Like before we got, that one scene at the, Manders house where Mrs. Manders kind of started to freak out and say, "Get that monster away from us," and stuff like that. And that's the only vibe I really remember that, apart from the climax, obviously. As far as like, building Charlie up to be a monster. And it's because you can still do that, but balance out, her being sympathetic and just a child and being just out of control in general. But yeah, so I was kind of interested to see it take a bit more of a horror angle, but then naturally they found a way to fuck that up and take it way too far, and way too desperately. Because talking about the Manders house, the only one that really gets, screen time is Irv. It's the same story. We know he picks them up and he takes them to his house. They pose as other people. He figures it out pretty quickly. But there's a big change here. And not just the fact that Irv is obsessed with Netflix documentaries for some reason. That seems a bit clashing since it's on another streaming service, but whatever. But no, talking about it trying to play itself off as a horror movie. Where it's like the bathroom scene, I can see where they're going and where they're coming from and how this could work or could have worked. But then we get this really desperate scene where it tries to be a horror movie for no reason. where Mrs. Manners has now been in a car accident, and so she's like in another room, but all the lights are turned off, and she's in a hospital bed and she's immobile. And Charlie comes in and sees her in the dark, and it's like a horror movie scene. They play it that way for some reason that feels extremely unnecessary, and it just sticks out in this way that you can. I mean, I guess you could see it as like, oh, this is the way a child would see this thing, because the way children see things are typically, exaggerated, especially if it's something that they're gonna find scary. But no, with the way it's shot and a sort of jump scare effect, they're treating the scene like it's a horror movie because, like I was saying, it's more of a sci-fi story than a horror story, but they want it to be a horror movie because that's what they're trying to sell. So that's why we get this random scene with Mrs. Manners for no reason. So I don't know, but and those horror touches like that are kind of in here, like as you can expect when it's they like when we're getting towards the climax. But I mean, if you're expecting like a really big and wild climax like what we saw before, that's not gonna be what's here. It's really funny when they're at the shop because I don't know. Obviously, this had to have been like a COVID shoot, right? And and that is no more apparent than when Charlie's walking around being all sinister in the shop. We're inside the shop now, which is like this very standard looking lab place now, and it looks like it has like 5 employees that she runs into, and they're the only ones here because we did get this very vast sense of the shop in the original movie, at least. Like, it was on all this ground and all this property, and they had all this stuff going on and all these employees. And yeah, it looks like 3 to 5 incompetent people work here that only exist just to get vaporized. And that's pretty much it as far as that goes. There's one guy they introduce, and I have no idea. Once again, keep in mind, this movie is like an hour and a half, which isn't a lot of time as much as it might feel like it. But we go through the trouble of introducing a shop employee that Charlie has to get information from, and we get this whole setup where he's on the phone with his pregnant wife. And then there is an altercation here where while Charlie's trying to get information from him, he pulls a gun on her, and she has no choice but to fry him. And it's like, how are we supposed to feel about that exactly? Are we supposed to feel bad for the shop guy because he had a pregnant wife? Why do we care what's going on in the shop guy's home life? He's only here as a vessel for information. That's what characters like him are for. Is it to make Charlie feel more like a horror movie monster? Are we taking that detour again? I don't know. None of it makes fucking sense, really. So, at least as far as the choices they made. So, there's that whole thing. Other characters that are here that we know, or apparently we thought we knew at one point, were we got Dr. Wanless here, who is played by Kurtwood Smith now, and they're just wasting the fuck out of his time. I think he's got like 2 scenes, doesn't even get a death scene this time, and you probably could have completely cut him out of the movie. When they're doing the testing stuff during the opening credits, you don't even see him, you just hear his voice off screen. So we get 2 scenes of him, both of which are him and Hollister scenes, of course. And Hollister, you might remember, was initially Martin Sheen, has now been gender swapped to be Gloria Reuben. And normally I wouldn't even bother to mention, oh hey, they gender swapped the character. But here's the thing, is there is one moment where this has a very clumsy call to attention. There's like one line that's blatantly like showing off, hey, Hollister's a woman now, isn't that weird? But that's not the problem. The problem is that, now I'm trying to remember how familiar with Gloria Reuben I am, because it's, from what little I glanced at, it's a lot of like a TV sort of legend, and it's like I knew the name when I heard it, and then it's like all these legendary TV shows that she had really big parts on. I'm not familiar enough with her to know if she's a good actress or not. But Gloria Reuben in this movie might be one of the worst performances. I was trying to figure out the other day what exactly the cutoff here should be. I'm gonna say maybe one of the worst performances in a Stephen King adaptation. That seems brutal enough, but not too brutal, I guess. Like, I can't say it's all-time bad or anything, but I don't know what the hell this performance is supposed to be, but it's absolutely dreadful. And I feel like it's actually not that often anymore that a performance... Maybe I'm just more forgiving now, I don't know. But I feel like it's not that often anymore I see a performance that stands out to me that much. Of how, like, oh my god, this is an awful performance. And I was just saying that about, what's her name in West Side Story? Whose name I've already forgotten. Rachel Zegler. Like I said, those are close together, but I feel like it's few and far between lately where I see a performance that just really stands out to me as awful, and this one did that immediately, and kept that up throughout. Now, there's one character we haven't talked about yet. That's obviously Rainbird. And we had George C. Scott as Rainbird in the original movie, which was an interesting bit of casting. He's the right race now. We have Michael Grey Eyes playing him here. But no eye patch. I was thinking, I know Scott has the eye patch halfway through the original movie. I was thinking the eye patch was like a constant thing for this character in the book, unless I'm completely mistaken. But no, he just looks normal, and now he's like this, I mean, yeah, he was supposed to be a vet anyway, but, a veteran anyway, but, they really play that up now, that he's this really, really deadly killing machine, but they basically went where, Rainbird's the kind of guy where, like, in the book, he'd show up to the shop in a suit, and he'd talk to Hollister about what was going on, and George C. Scott would kind of walk around and be, like, really sinister. He had they really played up his obsession with Charlie and his obsession with seeing her power up close and stuff like that. Where he's a really creepy character, sure, but he's got all these other sort of facets to him and this backstory and stuff like that. This movie seems to want to make him like Anton Chigurh or something, and he's extremely hands-on. He's doing, like we get the scene in the original movie where he kills Wanless, and he builds up he's going to kill Charlie the same way, is his plan. But in this movie, Rainbird's just killing everybody. Like, you need anybody killed, he's the one that shows up. And so they're trying to make him, like, the sort of ultimate antagonist of the movie. Which, in the story, I guess he technically is anyway, even though there's a whole lot of gray area as far as that kind of thing goes in this story in general. But this movie really, really, really wanted to set up Rainbird as, like, the big villain. Which, I guess I won't say exactly what it is, but this has one of the more nonsensical last shots to a movie that I don't think I'll ever be able to figure out how we got to that point, or how we're supposed to believe this is the point we got to. I don't know. I don't know what the hell is up with the last shot of this movie, but that's a whole can of worms as far as a problem goes. That's the way they handled the whole Rainbird character in general was just not sticking with me. Like in another story, I would get it. Like it's probably just one of those things where once you're familiar with the character enough and the story enough, it stands out more. That there's not much to this character anymore. And when they do try to bring the qualities into him that we know Rainbird for, because we know the previous story and movie, it's like with 3 minutes left. And it's late. And like I said, it leads us right into that's what the fucking ending is. And it's interesting what changes they made here, because they made a shitload of changes. That's what I was saying, where it was like you would think it being 20 minutes shorter, they just cut out a lot. But no, not only did they cut out a lot, they've added so much shit. And there's one thing, I don't remember this being a book thing, but I could be wrong, because the book is a little fuzzy to me. This scene in this movie they have where there's a cat that she accidentally, snaps at and sets it ablaze, and then it's still hanging on barely, and she has to put it out of its misery. And this is really harsh lesson of what she's capable of and what she can do to living things and stuff like that. There's something in there. There's something in there that could add another layer. But like I said, these things are here and then they vanish, and what the rest, whatever the next moment is, just completely feels like on a different planet than what we just saw. Um, and that's not even to say. Yeah, another thing I was gonna say, going back to feeling like being on different planets. This scene, this at least the first scene between Wanless and Hollister. I don't know what that was because it felt like they were having two completely different conversations with each other. So there's so many elements of this movie where you can be in the same scene, and it's like the two elements aren't even there in the same room at all. And that's so much of it feels so weirdly cobbled together. I don't know if it's just like it's not just that a lot of stuff is taken out of the book or the original movie. It's that it feels like scenes were shot in their entirety, and like and then that's where like we're taking even more out of the stuff that was already going to be in this movie and just decided not to be. It's it's a mess. The whole thing, the way it's put together, everything. Like I said, I think the idea of having it in pretty much chronological order, it really, really kills the pacing. You can really see why that's done sometimes. Because sometimes I say it sounds like a lack of, it feels like a lack of confidence in the person telling the story, that they're not going to be able to hook the audience right away. But then this is a prime example where sometimes you do need that for a story like this. And it's like any way you tell the story of Firestarter, if you tell it in chronological order, you've got it's difficult. And this movie's certainly not up for any difficult tasks. So that's and there's after a while there's just some stuff that just sticks out that's you could almost say is petty, like the moment when we see the guys from the shop coming to the Manders farm, and when they look out the it's a window and a door. It looks very much like a green screen on a door when we're looking out this window. And then when they get there, there's the whole thing where Efron has to make eye contact with you in order for his power to work. So they have these eye protection things when they show up and capture them. So they have there's one moment where we see them do this, and it registers to us, the audience. Oh, that's how they're going to capture Efron. They've got those protector things on their eyes. But we get an extra moment. Like apparently they didn't think we caught that, even though they put that shot in very blatantly. So we have an extra moment where Efron tries his power. It doesn't work. The guy explains to him they have things protecting their eyes, which we can fucking see plain as day. And we saw them put them on and how they work. Hour and a half movie. Waste time like this. Even if it's a small amount of time, the movie's a small amount of time. So you gotta work that shit out and know what we're gonna know just by looking at it. And that's like I said, when a movie's bad enough, that's the stuff you start paying attention to. So that's what comes up. So I don't know if there's anything else to really go into. Like I said, I was going to try to give it the benefit of the doubt because there was room for an improvement on the original movie and the book itself. But this this had no intentions of looking for any of that. So it was just going to do its own thing and its own really, really not very good thing at that. So, and I can't, I feel like I should say something about the actress playing Charlie, but I don't really know what I can, because you got to give her the benefit of the doubt, because obviously she's, a child, and this is already, Barrymore already pretty much made the part, iconic in her own way. And as you can see, Barrymore's already relatively accomplished at that very small age, but here, this girl is the one that was eaten under the bleachers in It Too, Vicky. So that's the only thing I had to go on at the time, and it's yeah, she's not terrible. Like I said, the only terrible performance that comes through is Gloria Reuben, but it's she's not gonna be as memorable as Barrymore or anything like that. Like it's just gonna. That's the thing, is I don't really have anything to say about it. That's kind of where we're sitting with this. When Charlie should really be the focus of the movie. Like, it should be... Like, it was probably supposed to be her big bad moment when she says that pants on fire line at the end, but I don't know who wrote that down and thought there was any way to deliver that was going to sound good. So probably not her fault anyway. So we'll just go. Efron more or less comes out unscathed. Efron's fine. So it's got that going for it. So yeah, there. It's. I guess it's as pointless as I didn't want to think that it was going to be. So that sucks. Let's go ahead and go into Studio 666, aka that Foo Fighters horror movie. Now, I don't think this movie is great or anything, but I did gain some respect for... I gained some respect for it after I watched it, because I started, like, basically binging Dave Grohl interviews, and I rewatched his Hot Ones where he talks about it. And the reason that I respect this movie and the people that made it is the idea behind it, where it was essentially... I don't know if it was supposed to be like a music video or an experiment or what it was, but the way Grohl tells it, it was not supposed to be a movie that went into theaters and got a wide release. Nobody had that idea at the start of its inception, apparently. That just kind of happened without anybody really planning on it. And somebody with a lot of money liked the idea and said, here's the money, just make a movie and we'll put it in theaters. And it's like, that's the kind of thing you can appreciate, especially a horror movie. Because horror movies kind of tend to, especially horror movies, tend to come from that area of, oh, here's just a group of people that had a small idea and had fun, and made a lot of gore, and then a movie was born, against all odds. And that's... So yeah, I don't mind that. Like, that backstory adds a lot of charm to the movie that the movie itself doesn't quite have, like, you know, within itself. So that's gonna help it a little bit. You could say that's, you know, unfair or a cop-out or whatever, and it probably is, but that's another thing that's gonna take this movie a long way too, is the likability of the band. Because obviously they're not gonna be, you know, actors, you know, like great actors or anything like that. But when you see them, you know, together just kind of doing their thing, there is a lot of stuff that feels like bad improv that you would think would be more natural when it's just them playing themselves, but they're also playing, you know, it's that old thing where they're playing amped up versions of themselves, so there is acting going on. And it's like we talked about we're talking about this with this, but Nomadland, we talked about the idea of you can still play yourself, but doing that with this strange environment you're not used to with camera crews and stuff like that while you're doing this and trying to tell a story along the way. Even when you're playing yourself, acting is going to be involved, regardless. Whether you're playing yourself or an exaggerated version. So there's still a likability that comes through just in general, even if the line deliveries aren't exactly on point, and the dialogue feels kind of shaky back and forth, even though these are people that are as close as they are. And then eventually, of course, you know, Grohl's gonna get possessed, because that's what it's a possession movie. And there is a moment where he has, like, the whole concept is he, like, you know, plays music that kind of sets this whole thing off, this whole, like, this rock history that's in this house that's also haunting this house. Because we do get an opening with Jenna Ortega again, after this, X, and Scream, who has basically made a nice little home for herself in horror, and quite effectively, so good for her. But now that we're in the present day, and Grohl is listening to this music and ultimately getting possessed, as far as music sort of setting it off, and coming from, like, this rock background, I was getting vibes of the Lords of Salem, the Rob Zombie movie, the really, really shitty Rob Zombie movie. Which might kind of give you bad vibes if you thought about the Lords of Salem the way I did. But so there definitely is something in here. It's not necessarily... I think talking about the improv and then talking about this scene, and then the subsequent scenes because of this, I guess the main problem of the movie would be the fact that it's both a horror movie and a comedy, but it kind of has trouble finding footing in either of those genres. Where it's really not as funny as it probably could be, and it's not as, I don't want to say scary, maybe creepy as it could be, at least. The one thing that they do completely go all in on is the gore. And that might sound like a criticism, but it's kind of not, because it is very unpleasant to watch this movie because of the gore. Like, it's not very often anymore that gore makes me actually squeamish and makes me have to turn away. Every now and then there's like maybe one scene that'll do it, like every 5 years or so. Um, and this movie has like 4 or 5 scenes that are very, very hard to watch because of the gore. And while that might seem like, oh, they couldn't make a creepy movie, so they relied on gore and using it as a crutch. But the gore, I think that's a compliment that the gore is hard to watch. Because, and I think what brought that back, because that wasn't the case for a while there in like the early 2000s when like Saw was big, and the big complaint was, oh, it's all about the gore, so that's not impressive anymore. It's a crutch. But now that things have been so reliant on, like, CGI and stuff like that, and just stuff that looks completely unreal, when you can see, there's obviously still going to be CGI, and some of it's, like, really over the top, but there's just enough what appears to be practical gore here that it, and the reason that I feel like it has to be to a certain extent practical is because of how fucking disgusting it is. And it's like that kind of level of disgusting you can't quite pull off with CGI, because CGI is gonna look fake at some point. And this looks like really gross, disgusting, old school effects in many scenes. So I can actually get behind and appreciate how disgusting and hard to look at the gore is throughout this movie, and the fact that that's like the as big as it goes as far as production value is the gore they really got down. Um, but we do have these scenes also of them making music. That's something I talk about a lot when we talk about movies that are music theme or band theme or something. Is the best scenes in them are the scenes where we're watching the music get built from the ground up. Where like they find like one beat and then they build off of it and build off of it and then it's a song eventually. And we get a little bit of that. I feel like we definitely should have gotten more of that. But we do get some of that, and yeah, I mentioned that Carpenter did the score for Firestarter for some reason. Um, and he does it here as well. But not only that, he's actually in this movie. Like I was trying to figure out if he was playing himself or not. I don't think his character got a name, but his character is working on the music, so I kind of jumped to that conclusion. Uh, and so that's nice. And there's one other cameo that's kind of fun. It's I'm probably just saying it because it's not there's a Lionel Richie cameo that's very funny in like the middle of the movie. But apart from that, not a lot stands out comedy-wise. They bring in Will Forte, and you would think that immediately Will Forte would be able to bring something. But they just give him a one-joke character, and there's one joke involving ranch. It's a line involving ranch that's pretty funny that kind of stems from the Will Forte thing. Um, but apart from that, it's all kind of pretty forgettable. And Whitney Cummings is here also. Same thing. Somebody we know that can be very funny, but just doesn't really have much of anything to work with. And is really just kind of here. Well, she's also got kind of that cliche character where she's the one that kind of seems to know the past of the house, but it's and she's basically we're just waiting for her gory fate essentially, because she knows too much, I guess. But and the obligatory sex scene, which in movies like this, when they're doing it clearly as homage, once again, you can appreciate it enough, even if it feels like a cliche and old. That's pretty much the point. The idea of bringing some of this old stuff back, whether it be practical gore, cliches, or stuff like that, when you can tell what they're doing, you can appreciate it to an extent. But yeah, I just think that's the problem we come back to, though, is I feel like it's a little too long. It's like an hour 40 something, which is probably unnecessary. Um, because a lot of it is because we talk about that stuff that's in it that's good, but it feels like the movie's not. That's not the highest percentage of what this movie is as a whole. It's smaller portions of it are those things that say, "Oh, I see what they're doing here, and I like it." Everything the other stuff isn't bad or anything. It's just like it all feels like lesser versions of what it could be, which brings us back to the beginning thing of they weren't really even planning on making a movie when they started this. So how far can this criticism even really go? Like I said, when you see the likability of them, it's like, do you even want to try to do that? But yeah, at the end of the day, you can say pretty much objectively that it's an okay movie, but it could have done a lot more. And once you get the money thrown at you to make a movie, there's got to be like if you have an actual director and you have actual writers, you could probably strengthen these aspects a little more. But like I said, I'm just really hesitant to hate on it at all because especially with Dave Grohl here, it's like who wants to hate on Dave Grohl? Like you just don't. You just don't do that. So, but yeah, it could have been a lot more as far as comedy and horror. But it's all fine and likable enough. And like I said, if you're here as a horror fan and want to go into like well done gore, um, even some of it, I don't even know if you can completely call it well done, but it's the fact that it's fucking gross is enough, I guess. So, um, so let's go into Umma, which is Korean for mother, apparently. This movie that Sandra Oh is in that went to theaters very, very briefly. Like it's like it was actually here, but it was here so briefly it just kind of went in and out of my head. And then I saw like an advertisement that said like it's on digital now, and it's like, oh, I guess I should catch up on that, especially since we're kind of exploring horror now. Co-produced by Sam Raimi, which is always intriguing as far as horror goes, and the setup is interesting enough where it's clear we're getting some kind of backstory involving electricity, and then later on, very quickly, it's introduced that Sandra's character has grown up essentially abused by her mother in certain ways, to the point that she may or may not have an allergy, some sort of negative bodily reaction to electricity that could kill her. Like if it's just present. Like when people pull up in cars or something, she says they can only go so far, and no electricity in the house, obviously. So immediately I got like the others kind of vibes, which I guess you could say. But a lot of what I'm gonna say about this movie is basically what I was just saying about Studio 666, where it's trying to do at least a couple of things, and it's not quite getting there on delivering on either one of them. But this one gets a little closer because there's this trend we've been seeing. I talked about it when we talked about these other two movies, and now articles are starting to get written about the closeness of these movies' themes, and you can add this one to it too. It's when we talked about Turning Red and Everything Everywhere All at Once. This idea of taking whether it be the animated you know factor of Turning Red, where what you would see in an animated movie, where it's like a child turns into an animal and stuff like that, and then that ends up turning into an allegory of her trying to break away from the firm hand that her mother holds over her, and same thing with Everything Everywhere All at Once. This big fantasy movie at the end of the day is just the allegory for, hey mom, you need to respect me, and I also need to respect where you come from, but you also need to let me go, etc. And here it is, but now it's in horror form. It's the same thing. But this one this one approaches this in a relatively admirable way. Like I said, even though it doesn't quite deliver on the dramatic aspect of that in its allegory or the horror aspect, There's enough touches of it here where you can see the effectiveness underneath, but you can see it just enough that you can tell it's not quite getting there, unfortunately. Um, as far as the horror element, there are some things that they handle pretty well. There's one moment in particular where this spirit seems to morph quickly over Sandra's shoulder and then disappear. And the thing that I liked about this scene was that there was no sound. There was no, like, jump scare effect. It just kind of appeared and then it vanished, which is rare. It kind of felt like something that, kind of like the stuff that I was praising in The Night House with Rebecca Hall last year. Something like that, where you can be super creepy and you can have, like, ghosts in the house and stuff like that without doing the big jump scare thing and the stuff that makes those movies so annoying and unbearable, and actually make it creepy for once. And there's another nice scare involving, what do you call, like, the beekeeper thing, where she looks ahead, and it's an effective jump moment where there's the thing is there in front of her, and it's this great shot where we stay on her point of view, and she lifts up the netting on the beekeeper thing, and as she lifts up the netting, the thing disappears, like, along with it, as opposed to just like, oh, it's there and then it's not. We see it kind of disappear in that pullback, which is very cool and very well done. But stuff like that's few and far between. And once again, let's go back to what I kept criticizing about Firestarter was what they decide to spend time on when the movie's very short. Now, while Firestarter was like an hour 34, this movie is even shorter. This movie is like over 10 minutes shorter than that. This movie barely exists as far as runtimes go. It's like barely an hour 20, which is insane. And it's like, while it's nice to see movies that aren't bloated and, can be really concise, sometimes you also see a runtime like that and you wonder, well, how much is missing? Like, are they going to use that time wisely enough to be able to have an impact in that small amount of time? Or is the movie going to feel too brief? And I think this is a case of maybe too brief, a little too brief, where they probably could have gone a little more into, especially more into, like, the emotional aspect. Could have really helped this movie out a lot. Because we talked about stuff like Ari Aster is really good at that, where he brings in, like, real human emotion and we watch real human stories for what feels like a long time, so that when the horror starts to get incorporated into them, the horror feels more real than it ever would have in just, some random story. But if it feels lived in and we establish these people with real feelings and real relationships, when that horror comes in, and often through them, you're going to have a pretty fucking wild ride like we see in Ari Aster movies. There's an Ari Aster movie in this concept, but it's also feels very sort of not quite amateur hour, because you can sense Raimi's touch. And even though he's just a co-producer, you can still kind of feel like, his, signature over it. If in time lettering's still there, still barely there, but this idea of going into, like, layered trauma, where it's like, one family member does something bad, and then it affects the other, and then it's this endless chain, and putting a stop to that chain. There's something here about that that's clearly present. Like I said, there's really just not enough time to focus on it enough that emotion doesn't come completely through once we're in the horror element, and doesn't have that lasting impact that something like, Hereditary would have, or does. But that's and they kind of also play with that idea about is the electricity thing legit or not, and that'll thing, or is it something that's kind of hidden? Like, as far as that being, a bit of a mystery. There's a little bit of intrigue, but overall it's just everything feels very sort of slight, but you can, like, just see the ideas enough. It's almost like they were writing it and they were like, oh, if we just have the ideas here, maybe that'll be strong enough. But you kind of got to expand on that. So you would think that would be rule one, but it's hard to believe what people can get made. But with Sam Raimi's name on it, no less. But, yeah, so it doesn't really reach the potential of either of the things it's working on here. That whole idea of, parental damage being something that moves forward, and through generations and stuff like that. It's all here, You see it, but you can't really feel it, I guess, is the issue. And the most concise way to put it, I guess. Plus, it just ends up being one of those movies after a while where just, like, everything is shrouded in darkness. Where, like, you can barely see anything in this. In this movie, when they're in, like, you know, the basement and stuff like that. You can, like, kind of make out the outline of Sandro's face while she says her daughter's name a few times. But that's about it. But there's something admirable in here. Like, it probably comes through a little more than I might be letting on. Like I said, maybe it's the runtime that ultimately does it in. Because they just don't really bother to expand as well as they could and find that really deep emotional core in the way that they could. It's more just like, it just sort of comes to the conclusion that we expect it to that's going to wrap the story up, rather than coming to this really deeply emotional place. It's just ending the script and not really finding, you know, whether it be peace on the other side or emotional catharsis or something like that. It's the whole movie's like here, but it's barely here. Is the problem. So it's not bad. It would be worth checking out if you're like, you know, really into horror and you need something else. You've gone through like all your streaming services or whatever, and all the horror is gone. This one can exist in the background, and you could get a little something out of it, a little bit of emotion probably. But you might have to work a little bit. So for a movie that's so short too, but you know. So let's end on The Cursed, a movie by Sean Ellis, who is the writer and director. This is a movie that was at last year's Sundance under the name 8 for Silver, which is very interesting. This it's really funny because I was getting ready to say this is a movie that is not what I thought it was, and apparently that's a common thing. Because I hate to, you know, put other people down and stuff like that, and probably sound pretentious, but I was having a conversation recently. We were kind of talking about the fact that, you typically know a horror movie is going to be good if you look at the critics' scores and you see that the critics' score is high and the audience score is low. It's usually like, it's probably good then. And what I mean by that is a lot of casual horror fans that want a full-on traditional horror movie will come into this, and that's not what it is. And they get... And, you know, you can understand, you know, why people would go against a movie for that if it's not what they came for. But this is the kind of thing where you have to go in with that in mind, where it's like... The only thing I knew about it going in was it was supposedly a werewolf movie, and yeah, it is a werewolf movie technically, sure, but probably not exactly what you're thinking when you hear werewolf movie. Like I didn't know that it was, even though many or most werewolf movies are, I wasn't aware that it was a period movie. But what was also really funny was not only is it a period movie, but I learned this by watching it, and when you watch it, it starts in World War One. So naturally you would think if it starts in World War One, it must go forward in time. But no. After this World War One prologue, we go further back in time to the 1800s, and that's where our story is set. And yeah, we're getting a really gnarly story with really gnarly gore being told to us. And once again, working in allegories, we've got, you know, like colonialism and slavery in here and stuff like that. Not even necessarily explicitly, through allegory, but you get the point. And so we get imagery, very wild imagery, like people having their limbs cut off and then being strung up like human scarecrows. Stuff that feels like really classic mythological horror stories in this really cool way. And I was trying to... But I guess this is... I hate to do this with, like, you know, all movies, especially horror movies, where it's like, oh, this is like this thing or this thing, whatever. Like when we were talking about, like I brought up the Lords of Salem for Studio 666 and all their homages, and then, you know, like the others for Umma and stuff like that. But here, it was, like, I was getting... It's interesting because, yeah, it's like, you know, it's like, the thing I kept thinking in my head was, it's like Silver Bullet by way of The Witch, is what this kind of feels like, I guess. With some moments in here that kind of feel like imagery out of The Innocents, also. certainly more feelings of the innocence here than in The Turning from, what was that, a couple of years ago. That was the actual remake. But yeah, so there's a lot of in this that feels very sort of classic horror in this very different way, where it doesn't necessarily feel, you know, homage-y in a sense. Like you just kind of get hints of other movies, but it feels like it's telling this sort of very old classic story, which is something that goes perfect with the werewolf genre. Even if you're not getting what you completely expect out of a werewolf story, but there's also stuff here that you would think would be overkill that actually works really well in some really great detail, like how they introduce biblical lore into what's going on here in a really cool way. That's the kind of thing I would. That's the kind of thing I'd kind of turn away from immediately. It's like, come on. But no, the way they utilize it is actually really cool and suits the story in a really interesting way and adds this whole other sort of sinister quality to it that's really cool. Um, Production values are really good, kind of off the charts good. We got a strong cast here that's not like extremely familiar faces. You'll notice like Boyd Holbrook and Kelly Riley and stuff. But not faces that like really stand out. And I think that helps a movie like this a lot because it really helps in the whole setting setting the tone of like the era and setting us to a place where we can go back to the 1800s and see faces that we're not going to quite recognize that look like they're of the era. And that'll really set the scene really well. Um, if there is one thing that probably doesn't work in that sense, it would be when it has to use CGI. And I word it that way for a reason. That like they have to use CGI because we eventually get to the inclusion of certain things, but the CGI does not look very good despite all the other production values. But that's the thing also is I was able to forgive it quickly because I felt like it felt like they put so much effort into what we're actually seeing that's actually there that's why like I know that's the idea is you should give like, you know, equal priority to every aspect of your movie when you're making it. But it's like the stuff that's here and actually practical is so good. I stopped caring pretty quickly that the CGI was shit, and it does. We do see more and more CGI as it goes on, but even so, there's still these moments that stick out that sort of feel like they eliminate that anyway. There's one scene in particular where something is being dissected, we'll say, and then it goes in a very crazy direction, and the imagery's fucking nuts, and it's really cool and it's really good, and yeah, and there's a part of me that would like to see another, you know, classic, more traditional werewolf story. Like we were kind of promised that in the Conjuring universe with Annabelle. Annabelle Comes Home, I think, was the one that introduced the werewolf, and then that was supposed to be what the Conjuring 3 was, but then they went into that whole other thing. Um, but but that was really shitty CGI for that werewolf, and it's like let's go back to, you know, like, and obviously I have my soft spot for the Wolfman. Joe Johnston's the Wolfman, but you know, they go back to stuff that we saw in like American Werewolf in London and make up stuff and stuff like that. So this isn't that, but like I said, this still tells a very interesting story and a very unique a story that we kind of know in this really unique and unexpected way, and that's what I was kind of appreciating. This the more and more this went on, and it was like this wasn't what I was expecting, but I really like what I like how unexpected this was. Like it made what's going on in the story more effective. That this was not the movie I was expecting, which is great. So yeah, there's even some stuff in here that almost feels like touches from the zombie genre a little bit, subgenre, whatever you want to call it. But it almost feels like it's sort of blending those a little bit also, and it's yeah. So I don't really I feel like this is a hard one to talk about without saying too much because pretty much right about when we get to about maybe the 20 minute to half an hour mark, I feel like everything after that could be spoiler territory. So I might just go ahead and end this here and just highly recommend this and say that. Like, I just kind of know what you're in for if you're gonna go into it, because that'll help a lot. um, as far as you knowing what you're in for, being that it's not probably what you're thinking it is. Is the extent I can take that probably. So yes. So I think that's the only good movie we talked about. Almost there. It's almost there, and you know we like the Foo Fighters anyway, but Studio 66 is not that great either. So and Firestarter's Firestarter. So that's what all that is. So next week we have Men, the Alex Garland movie. I don't know if I'm going to go to Downton Abbey right away or not. I might wait for the cheap day on that. I don't know. But the Chip and Dale movie with Mulaney and Sandberg is on Disney Plus. There's probably something else. I'll probably have to look into that Rebel Wilson thing if I run out of things. But that'll be stuff that's coming. And then after that, we should have Top Gun. So that's going to be really exciting. And then after Top Gun, we should have June. And then we'll really be in the summer season and see what the hell is out there that I don't remember off the top of my head. So until that, I don't know. We don't have any more group videos for another 2 weeks. So whatever Owen and Ashley are going to be doing, I guess we'll find out. So I'll find out with you. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.